I watched the Hobbit trilogy, not the extended editions, but just the normal editions, partly because I don't remember particularly liking them that much. And I was having a conversation with a buddy about, oh, I wish I had some more Lord of the Rings. Um, and oh, maybe I should rewatch the Hobbit movies. And, the Lord of the Rings, just phenomenal. The original trilogy, Fellowship, Two Towers, Return of the King. Um, if I had to rank those three, it would go Fellowship first, Return of the King second, Two Towers third. I love them all, though. I mean, they're movies that I think are going to be timeless. They still look really good, great storytelling. And just, by the end of it, it's just like those are the ones that I love the extended editions. I think they add a lot to it. But I remember going through The Hobbit the first time and, liking it, but just thinking, oh, this is a different kind of vibe. It's not quite as serious. Obviously, the dwarves are a little more goofy because, that's how Gimli was in the original trilogy. He was a little goofy. And so they've extrapolated that to the race of dwarves, I guess. But I will say I was pleasantly surprised rewatching them. I do think the first one, An Unexpected Journey, is probably the best one. It brings you back into the world. It really does set up the rest of it, like introducing all the dwarves. It has some good action, but it is more of that adventure side of it, not necessarily like the big battles that can get a little, like, I would say that was probably one of the faults of the original trilogy, is like by the Return of the King, those big battles were kind of desensitizing. They didn't mean as much. That's why I love the smaller scale battle of just the Fellowship at the end of that movie, where, it's the 7 of them or whatever, going up against the smaller orc army, just with a lot of at stake there. But that's kind of how the first Hobbit is to An Unexpected Journey, where there's more smaller scale action at the end. It's a little more immersive, a little more personal. But yeah, there's some humor that I feel like doesn't always need to be there, but there's also a lot of good parts that bring in all the old callbacks, that kind of makes you feel nostalgic. And then, you learn more about Bilbo and his journey, and that's good. So I probably still think that's the best one, but I also think Desolation of Smaug is really good as well. All the parts with Benedict Cumberbatch as Smaug are very solid. I don't care much for the Lake Town stuff. I understand its place in the story, but it's just not as interesting to me, kind of the politics that have gone on there. However, I do think that movie is pretty good. So if you're going to look at all 5 of the movies so far, you've got masterful, the Fellowship of the Ring. I would say slightly less masterful, the Return of the King. Top of the genre for the Two Towers. So those 3 are all just pinnacles of fantasy. Then I'd say The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey is more of like, hey, this is a very good movie. Like, if there were no Lord of the Rings movies, the Fellowship preceding it, all those ones, then it would feel a lot better. But because it's being compared to those, it's not quite as good, but it's still a very good movie. Desolation of Smaug is a good movie. It's not great, nothing special, but it's still really good. And then the Battle of the Five Armies is, I know it was pretty divisive in terms of like the critical ratings. It got, let's see here, 59% on Rotten, where the other 2 were Unexpected Journey was 64, Desolation of Smaug 74. But Battle of the Five Armies, it starts out pretty slowly. It's continuing on from the previous, in the ending of Smaug, which the dragon had just, been released, essentially. Spoilers. And so it kind of ties that up and takes a while to get back into what's going to happen next with the Five Armies part. And I don't care much for that or the big giant battle. However, at the very end, when the dwarves, the original dwarves, on the trek to open up, to get to the castle and the mountain, come back into the fight, I think it gets really interesting again. So very poor at the beginning, like average at best, but I think it has a great ending. And of course, there are a lot of stakes, which up to this point there hadn't been. So there are some major character deaths that actually hit pretty hard, because similar to the original trilogy, you've had 3 movies of 2.5 hours plus getting to know these characters, and when they die off and they're actually fighting for something pretty important, then pretty good stakes. And then of course, once that Billy Boyd song, The Last Goodbye, kind of it's the culmination of not just this trilogy, but the entire 6 movie stretch of like, oh yeah, we're never going to revisit the world this way again in the Peter Jackson vision. Although I guess there is a show going to be set in the Middle Earth universe, but it won't be the same. So it's kind of, you get a little sad there towards the end, but I do think it ends really well. And I would definitely recommend revisiting them if you hadn't seen them. Maybe watch that. I mean, it is a prequel, right? Maybe watch that again before you watch the Lord of the Rings original trilogy, because otherwise that'll just make this seem not as good, of course. But if you do go back, watch those 3 first, whenever you have a weekend to spend literally 48 hours watching all these movies, go back and watch the Hobbit ones again. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised like I was. Yeah. So I would recommend all 3 Hobbit movies.